Awesome. There we go. Straight off the plane. Thank you so much for being with us. I'll hand over to you and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. And Johannes, hopefully you will be able to see Gustavo, my brother, and our CTO, and maybe you can bring him in. If not, I can start as we go.
There we go.
There
Gustavo
you go.
should be there as well. I just see the green screen so far, but that should be fixed in a
I
second.
am here. I just don't know why the screen doesn't show me, but that's I've been trying the technical issue there.
We
Okay, but
we keep
we
him. We
trust
hide him
that
in
we hide him in plain sight. Exactly. All right. Thank you so much, guys, and I'll let you do your stuff.
Thank you. So thank you, Johannes. So we are Gustavo Montoya and Martha Montoya. Gustavo will show up somewhere in the future. Gustavo is our CTO, and he's based in a city called Wenatchee, Washington, which is out of Seattle. I would say an hour and a half, 2 hours. It's called the capital of the Apple world. It's where all the apples from Washington come from in the United States, and happens to be also a hub of technology, believe it or not, mainly because we have the Columbia River, and the Columbia River coming down has a lot of wonderful power. And you could see a lot of the data centers. Gustavo will tell you a little bit about it because it's interesting to see how transformation of who we all are, engineering and all is happening, even in small towns. So Gustavo, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us a little bit about Wenatchee and how we're hiring the engineers there for this whole data center and what we're doing.
Thank you, Martha. I think I got the camera finally working. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. Yes, I live on the second most western state of the United States. So Alaska goes in first, then goes Washington State. We're about 2 hours from the Seattle area. So I happen to live in the Silicon Forest for the Seattle area. So many tech companies are, and the Eastern Washington side, which is a very ag oriented. My background is and has been in technology all my life. My passion was databases and database architecture. I've worked already in 8 industries, and the last one for the last 3 years, working with Martha. And yes, she happens to be my sister. And it has been a really blessing to be part of the ag industry over these last 12 years. I have worked with the other 8 industries, which have summed up to really understand how supply chain works and to be very agile in our way of developing our software as a service with the many changes of the ag industry as they take place, to be very agile with databases that are really agile and easy to work with in a very hyper changing market for us.
And Wenatchee in particular, Gustavo, became important in the region, and that's how where we're hiring our engineers for what we're doing, which I'll give them a little bit of what we are in a minute, but I'd like them to see how a rural area becomes such a hub of technology.
Yeah, it's very interesting for us here in the Columbia Basin. So the Columbia River that goes all across Eastern Washington down to Oregon and then to the Pacific has become a very strong hub for data centers. And that's because power, through hydropower, it makes it very inexpensive for powering the many server farms that we have here. So it's interesting that not only we have farms for real agriculture, but we also have farms for actually servers in sitting here with thousands and thousands of them. That has kind of giving us an interesting approach to the ag industry in that we can see how they're merging in the use of that technology for the proper, from farming, ag precision to everything that has to do with market-driven data.
And with that, I am based in California, which is one of the most interesting and hubs of the specialty crop industry among all of them. And sitting on the California Department of Food and Ag, I have been a witness on the last 6 years, besides my 30 years of experience, on how the transformation of the industry through the technology and the automatization. From the farmers and the hardworking workers all the way to now having the robots trying to harvest the fruits, whether it's in California with strawberries or whether it's in Washington State with apples. And with that, we can start a little bit of the presentation. We have, I don't know if Gustavo is able to put a slide, but what we want to discuss is what very few people have understood through the years, and is the fact that the ag industry should be looked into a completely different, from a different perspective. We all have been for the many years and traveling the world and developing crops. We have seen that we are very linear of how we think about supply chain, and very few people have understood that ag is not a linear system. It's actually, we call it a highway instead of a freeway, and has changed throughout the years. So there's a paradigm, and Gustavo can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. So the paradigm shift that we see in our industry is that we're always thinking very sequential, and we no longer can afford to do that in a very fast-moving industry because there's undoubtedly many variables that affect the commercialization of the product. We always have thought that if we have to look at things in a linear way, and in an industry that has so many variables, we've definitely had a different approach on how to look at information. From the beginning, Martha, asked me to see how we could look at data in a different way. And through the passion of databases, for me, it was very important to have a very approach of non-relational databases, because every time anybody, we look at the view from a global perspective, many different countries, many different regions, many different areas affect each location. And so what is key for one location is not key for another. In a relational database model approach, this sequential thinking really strains and constrains the ability for people to make decisions in a mass faster way. So by looking at it from a very, very no schema, no relational approach, then each data source, each region, each location, each person in the stakeholder supply chain can look at things in the way that they need to look at for that decision to take place.
So when you show the next screen, we love to put always a map and a human being, which in this case is a young kid, looking at the world. And we know that we all work very hard on the farms, but when it comes to what happens in the world comes and impact us. And we have a theory that there's 76 variables that impact at any time our farming, supply chain, agricultural food industry. And very few people will see it unless you talk to one of our grandparents who never used to have computers and had to continuously think with the brain fast. Let me understand what's going on in the next town. Let me see what's the weather pattern in the competitive region. Let me see how is the exchange rate impacting me. How is there a strike going to happen at the port? So when you start adding all these variables, all of a sudden you have a dynamic that it's important for us in the ground, the farmers, to understand, because it doesn't do good if you put a lot of the effort and the energy on saving or making the crops better, or saving the water, or making it more efficiently, or in fact growing more per yield, because when you go out to the market, something happens. And so give you a couple examples that has happened in the last couple even weeks or months. And it's the fact that, for example, on a blueberry production, blueberry production is worldwide now. And so all of a sudden, Argentina has a devaluation, and all of a sudden you start sending a lot of that blueberry to the market, which is impacting our grower in Detroit, Michigan, or in Spain. And so what happens is that the dynamic of that understanding is very hard to grasp fast for our farmers, because they are not in with the data, the system data that will provide them those alerts to be able to adjust to the crops. So one of my crops that I managed was navel oranges from California for one of the retailers. And as I was working with the farm on January, I would be very alert to find out what the weather patterns or anything happening in South Africa or Australia, because they would come into the market in the United States somewhere around May. But if there was a lot of good rain in South Africa, in Cape Town, in January, then I knew that the crops would be late and therefore the vessels will be arriving into the United States late, which meant that we could extend the tree to produce more oranges longer until May. And the box, instead of charging $18 a box, we could charge $30 a box, because again, South Africa was late. But if we saw that there was not enough rain and they were going to come earlier into the market, we will manage the trees different to be able to cut that production faster, somewhere late April. So we would not be we would not be able to charge $18. We sometimes would get only $10. And to adjust that thinking into a farmer, it's a little bit harder, because the hope of a farmer is to extend the
Did we lose Martha?
I'm afraid Martha has some connection problems. Until she's back. Oh, she's back already.
Okay.
Hello, Martha. Welcome back.
I'm back again.
Maybe
So Gustavo, I think I lost you on the example, right?
yes, maybe Gustavo, maybe switch back to the slides and
Let me put it back again.
then we put it back again. Yeah. Short intermission. Sorry.
It's good. Here we go. Is that the one? Do you guys see it?
That's the one. We see it. Thank you very much.
So we lost you there in that part that you were building that case scenario where some of these things can be prevented if we're paying attention to those variables.
Mm-hmm.
And so another example
so
that
the oranges,
Go ahead.
citrus, we were able to hear the citrus.
Yeah, you were talking about the citrus and how South Africa was coming early or late into a market that plays had.
So the hardest part is to start adjusting us in the farming world to understand the market, to manage crops differently, and manage everything on the farm differently. So Gustavo, if you can show us a little bit of the tool on, for example, pineapple, where you could see the different areas of the dynamic of the thinking process of the brain, that would be great. I'm not sure if you can share that, but if you do in the meantime.
Yeah, let me do that.
So again, our job today is to bring awareness, to try to convince the industry to don't stop thinking linear. And though many thought before COVID-19 that we had a good supply chain and very stable supply chain with some modifications, some changes, that was not the fact. For us, many of us who were on the ground before, we knew continuously that there was a potential fall on the supply chain. Another example for it was you're ready to ship all your apples to India, and all of a sudden there's a strike at the port. It's not all of a sudden. There's alert systems in the world that you can read, that you can analyze, that will tell you that potentially there's going to be a strike at the port, and therefore you're not going to be able to ship those apples. And then how do you adjust your crops ahead of time, 3 months, 6 months in advance? I can tell you that right now there's a talk about strikes, port strikes across the world by the unions. Are we ready to adjust ourselves on the crop? Are we able to adjust our crops? Are we able to adjust our shipments and our logistics? Those are the alert systems that we're talking about that could be done by our tool or can be individually, because I used to do it manually. I would clip all the newspapers. I will read all the articles. I will find out through the government what was going on to be able to potentially look into it. So Gustavo, if you tell us a little bit in general, how the brain divides, which is between the weather, the volumes, the news, even a holiday that will impact you.
Yes, so what we've done is centralize all these data in one place where any stakeholder in the supply chain can take a look at it. GERS can have a chance to look at actually not only the precision ag, the production-centric view, but the market-driven view, meaning what's imported where, what kind of volumes are coming in or out from other competing regions. The weather is key, obviously, for our industry, and being able to look at some of these in a quick view screen like this one here. So you have your Wenatchee location here, historical weather, origin and destination for ourselves or somebody else that is a partner in that I'm working with, or competing locations, location 1, 2, or 3, as different commodities may have different views, as Martha pointed out from the South Africa example. Then looking at the volume of production from a global perspective, USA or global, where you can actually see many other countries. In this case, I have pineapples. And so having those at a keystroke distance to view any historical volume production for any of these countries. So it's really, really easy now to have all of these information in front of you. So this is where the paradigm shift takes place, because we are not used to having this much information available into one location, and it could be overwhelming. But all of it is now available now that the brain adjusts. The challenge that we had with lack of information is now meeting an opportunity to look at information that is going to be more concise at the time that the decision is that is being made throughout that supply chain, from the beginning, that first mile that Martha talked about, all the way to the commercialization of the product, all the way to the end consumer. And so all of these key areas of widgets are customizable for each stakeholder in a way that is more perceived or more interest for that particular logistical or merchandiser, or again, the grower that is trying to place historical data on what is a better variety of their product in a different part of the world. The news is really...
So if we... Go ahead, Gustavo. The news. And that can be done with or without tool. And
yeah, the news is really key because, as Martha pointed out, we had a situation, for instance, in Washington State in 2015. She talked about the strikes, and the Port of Seattle had some issues way back at the beginning of the year. So a strike doesn't happen overnight, but there's seldom issues that are taking place that are picked up from very different news sources, and that's where the artificial intelligence and machine learning takes place. The understanding of some of these that could affect and add weights to those as things are progressing or escalating that can create a problem. So if many of these growers would have known that the escalation was taking place in June, then they would have been prepared to have a plan B on how they're going to ship those apples out to China as the port completely closed. So those are the news that you see here, but this is across the world. In this case, we're looking at all the pineapple news globally, so that many of these can be searched on many different issues: disease, labor, climate, forecast, very many different keywords that as growers all we think about when it comes out to some of these news. Go ahead, Martha.
I would say, I think you can hear me, right, Gustavo?
Yes.
Okay, so all to say today, as we walk out of the stage, I want everyone to walk out by thinking not of the tool ourselves as the tool, but the shifting of the paradigm on two areas. One, that as farmers and producers, we have to look more globally and more in with all these potential 76 variables. You can have your own variables, but we think 76 of them. And the second one is to convince our buyers, because at the end of the day, those buyers, whether it's the industrial buyers, retailer buyers, if they start understanding this whole shift, they will adjust the contracts. They will adjust how they buy from all of us in the farming area. They will adjust how they do the thinking process, especially because most of our buyers are now young, new generations that have never been on the farm, but they understand data. They raise with data, they think data. So when you plan any of the crops that you have, think about these variables. Don't concentrate just on the farm. Just focus on the 3 or 4 or 5 variables that can impact you at any time, that crop that will produce whatever that is. Or even the ranches, whether it's the cattle, whether it's the seafood. All of our farms across the world are impacted by all these variables. And so walking out of the stage, hopefully today, we will leave that in all of your minds, that the brain, our grandparents' brain used to think like that. All buyers used to think like that. But with the dynamics of the world and the changes, we became a free way, and we need to readjust to think with a more open mind and many variables that will impact our supply chain. And everything starts, as I always say, on the ground, on our farms. Anything from you, Gustavo, to close on this?
I think that no, you nicely mentioned all these items. There is definitely technology, and the shift is where we are always very production driven. Now we can add another layer that is complementary, which is market driven decisions. To your point.
Thank you. And I think that we're going to be almost done. But in the meantime, while I come up, if there's no questions or if there are questions, we'll come up with a couple examples of some shifts that are happening right now. For example, in the world of lemons or citrus across the world, where the countries in Argentina and Chile and Peru are starting to send and deliver certain products that are much less expensive because of the exchange rate, and that is impacting everyone around. And also the weather patterns that are specific to the varieties that we all understand. A variety of blueberry in Chile is much different than a blueberry in Poland. How those production cycles impact us all in different types of the year, that will impact obviously us, our farmers, when they're deciding how much per yield, per crop, per hectare or acre will impact.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting how your tool serves as a kind of compass in this ever so complexing world, and helps us catching up to the knowledge of our grandparents. I liked how you put that. And actually, we received a couple of questions. Maybe let's have a look at them. And by the way, you're still able to vote and ask further questions. There was a lot of information in your talk, but maybe let's take one or two questions. What is the feedback of your clients? Did you invest a lot in educating them in using your tool? Gustavo, what was your experience in working with your first clients?
I appreciate the question. It's a very good question. We are always listening to our clients because that is part of the success we've had. Our tagline to the question is see more, achieve more. So one of the feedback from the clients is like, wow, I didn't know this was all available. Had I had this information, now I can actually make a decision. So the shift is going into that area where, okay, let me help you connect the dots with these many pieces of data sets so that, you can make a much more, because it could become very overwhelming and it could become noise to many. And so the insightful part has to be concentrated on that. So that feedback will be to connect the dots. But once it's done, it's amazing how many folks are so experienced in the industry. They get it right away. Once they open up, once they're willing to change that paradigm shift thinking.
Mm-hmm. Exciting.
But to answer also, we have been hearing the feedback of the customers, and the tool and the thinking process has been adjusting not only the brains, but also the tool. And I always claim that we have a Volkswagen, not a Formula One, because all of us in the industry are starting to get into it. And so little by little, as we get more on board, they understand better, we make it even better. But they don't want to drive a Formula One, but their time, because you have to remember, this industry moves so fast that they don't have sometimes the time to start grasping, and eventually they do it. And when one of the questions is, do we educate them? All the time. That's we call it edu entertainment continuously.
And yeah, this is well known that many clients want to have a tool with no effort and total outcome from the very beginning. But interesting concept that you improve it with your clients. So there's the obvious question, because there was a lot of information. Will we have a recording of your session? We will have a look at it, and we will provide you with whatever Martha and Gustavo agree to share with you and send it to you after the conference. So to get that out of the way. And one just last question. Maybe you see the two questions. Well, the first one is probably, are clients in other regions of the world any different, to paraphrase it? And how big is your team? Please, maybe you want to answer them quickly.
So the question is, yes, the concept is completely applicable globally. That's part of the reason why we started with the US, but we expanded globally. The information from other regions and continents is key because we are working a very global economy. And so decisions now definitely affect any region, anywhere in the world. And as far as the team goes, Martha, I don't have the last tally, but are we over 20 something now? You're in mute.
Oh, you're muted.
You're in mute.
Or maybe.
Oh, yeah. So we are definitely over.
But we are at the 20.
Mm-hmm. Over 20, yes.
And they're all located at Washington State, or also
so no.
else?
Well, as Martha pointed out, we have folks in mostly our engineering team is in the Wenatchee area, Washington State, but we have team members all across the U.S. and in the Americas as well.
So thank you so much, Martha and Gustavo, for joining us. Hope we will stay in touch with our community and hope that you will be available for any further direct questions from our participants today and tomorrow. And
we'll join into the sessions and connect with
wonderful.
you and assist with any more questions that's coming.